The world around us is changing faster than ever before. Ideas once only imagined in science fiction are becoming a reality. Throughout the course of our amazing 23-episode season, we'll speak to some of the greatest minds in robotics and artificial intelligence to discuss the groundbreaking work that's fueling it all. I'm your host, Ryan Myrehn. Join me and my co-host, Paul Mitchell, the president of the Indy Autonomous Challenge, and see why we call this the Inside Track. Today we're speaking with a pioneer in autonomous vehicles, Sebastian Thrun. He's the CEO of Kitty Hawk and the founder of Google's self-driving car team, as well as an educator and co-founder of Udacity. Sebastian guides us through the future of personal flying machines, the ethics of AI, and how the work of the Indy Autonomous Challenge will make the roads safer for everyone. Sebastian, it is a thrill to talk to you, to have you here on this show. I know from talking to Paul over the last few years, your vote of confidence in the Indy Autonomous Challenge had a lot to do with getting it off the ground. And for you, this AI in mobility, this has been a big part of your life for the past several decades. So for you to see how that has evolved, what pride do you take in playing a pretty major part in getting it to the place where it is today?
Look, it takes many, many people to invent a new technology like this. And I happened to be around when DARPA launched its very first challenge in 2005, where we had to build cars driving in the desert. I happened to be around when Google decided to get into the game and build Waymo, which I founded. And I'm super excited about the Indy 500 challenge. I think that's a great thing for humanity, and it's a wonderful thing to do.
Let's go back to the early days and to DARPA, which in many ways is the genesis of what the Indy Autonomous Challenge is about. What drew you, first of all, to that competition?
Look, there was a long time ago, 2005, the US government had reserved, I think, $2 million as prize money for someone who could build a car that could drive itself 140 miles to a desert trail. And I got drawn in not because I cared about desert driving, but I cared about human life. Earlier in my life, when I was 18, I lost my best friend to a traffic accident, and I felt reminded that by and large, humans are not the safest drivers on earth. And I was intrigued, thinking I could make a machine that could drive safer than people could drive.
You know, Sebastian, when you and I were talking in 2017 and 2018 about the concept of high-speed autonomous racing, I remember you talked about kind of the first frontier of automation and self-driving at lower speeds, trying to navigate the urban suburban environment, and that the next frontier was, you know, moving to high speeds, extreme speeds, 100 miles an hour, you know, plus, and testing whether or not the hardware, the software stacks could handle those environments. So we've been doing that now with competitions throughout the U.S. and we're going to be running in Monza and in Europe here in June. But where do you see the contribution of high-speed automation playing the greatest role in saving lives, in being part of the overall goal that we all have of autonomous mobility?
Yeah, look, that's correct. I always believed that the faster the vehicle goes, the harder it's going to be to handle it safely. So if you want to really challenge technology, going at the envelope of what's possible, physically possible, certainly challenges technology the most. The DARPA Grand Challenge, I think, was an average of about 20 miles an hour. It was very slow. The Google Waymo cars can drive highway speeds, but they try to stay away from extreme driving. But when it comes to really testing the technology, I think extreme driving, driving at the envelope of what's physically possible, is going to be the hardest test. And I love that you're doing this.
And to be living in the extreme, like the Indy Autonomous Challenges, it's an extended edge case, basically. Every time the cars are on the track, not only is it testing the technology, but also doesn't that say a lot to the consumer public as well to prove the efficacy of this technology in an environment that they wouldn't expect to have to be a part of themselves?
Yeah, it depends on how well they work, right? They all crash,
Sure.
Probably not. But I honestly believe eventually a robotic car will surpass the ability of a human driver, especially if we let the robotic car control wheels and brakes individually, which people can't do as easily, and given that level of freedom. And I think the technology that's being developed will trickle down into safer cars for normal drivers, because it's been always extreme racing technology that let us test out what is feasible and possible. And we then took this technology and brought it back to normal cars for normal safety.
One thing we've been working on and thinking about, some of the teams and some of the sponsors and technologists that are involved in Indy Autonomous Challenge, is also how do you transition the technology to human race car drivers in parallel with trying to advance the capabilities of the AI driver. And we often think of it in the context of advanced fighter pilots, right? Like if a human race car driver has the ability to have 360-degree perception, either through their visor or even their race control team can kind of provide indications to them if vehicles can take over in the event that unfortunately the driver misses a red flag warning or is out of control, that some of these technologies could allow human pilots of race cars to be closer to what we see in, let's say the advanced fighter pilots that are in an F-22.
Yeah, look, I would say that even today we have technology in cars that make us massively safer that goes way beyond human capabilities. The most notable is ABS, the ability to see if a tire is slipping and then release it very quickly to make sure it doesn't constantly slip, is a technology that saved uncounted numbers of lives. It's the racing field that develops these technologies first. And I believe that a computer system in principle doesn't just have a 360 view that people don't really have, but it also can look at details of the vehicle that people can pay attention to. Like, for example, is a tire slipping right now? And really help making the driving system much, much safer. And that's nothing new. That's been around for decades now, and I benefit from it. Everybody benefits from it. And I see this to progress. I think this is to get to the point where it might at some point be impossible to crash a car. It might be impossible to hit a pedestrian. It might just be impossible to do these things by having a smart car that looks over our shoulder and prevents us from making these mistakes.
One thing I've been wanting to ask you about for a while is just your perspective on this whole national global debate on AI. And for somebody who's been using advanced technologies and AI and machine learning and applying it to mobility, whether it's ground-based or aircraft, what is your perspective on AI as it relates to its contribution to society and how we can utilize it in ways that are productive versus, do you have any fear for the role that AI may play with the ChatGPT and other kind of human communication-based AI tools that are emerging?
Yeah, Paul, great question. In the early days of self-driving cars, we already used machine learning to train these cars so they could learn from us and from themselves. And now we're entering a world where we have large-scale, called large language models, LLMs, that are being trained on all corpuses of text and then show incredible productivity and capability to form original prose, that translate languages, to draw images and creative art. I would say we are at a big inflection point for humanity. We are at a point now where these models, these systems can do everything we ask a high school student to do with an A+. In fact, they can do pretty much anything we ask a college graduate to do, like a psychology major or maybe a marketing major. Some of them can even pass the bar exam, 90 percentile. Here in California, about 40% of candidates fail the bar exam. So it's obviously better than the average law school graduate. And that doesn't mean that they're going to replace all these people. Instead, they're going to make all of us much more powerful. They're going to enable us to do something in an hour that was previously taking us a month to do or a week to do. And that's nothing new. It's actually, historically, we did this already. We went through a transformation of society with the advent of the steam engine and modern agriculture over the last 100 years. Prior to that, most people in the world worked in farming. A farmer could make food for something like 4 people, their family. And now a farmer can make food for 400 people. And that has not been the end of civilization as we know it. It's been the opposite. I'd say we are all better off. We now live in a world that's safer. We live longer. We live healthier. We have more food. We have more everything because of this revolution. I think that's just the next step. The next step is going to be that everybody working in offices, from accountant to lawyer to what have you, will become 100 times as effective.
And I assume that you would see that extending to mobility and human safety and vehicles and aircraft, et cetera, that some of these learning models that are doing amazing things in the social sciences and literature and marketing will emerge further in the field of self-driving cars and vertical takeoff aircraft and other platforms.
Absolutely. If you go into San Francisco, you're surrounded by completely empty cars that drive themselves or cars that only have passengers. And the very first instantiation is technology provides safety. It's safer than human drivers. I think the Waymo cars now have driven roughly 30 million miles without any major accident caused by those cars. That's kind of amazing compared to human safety levels. But then the second stage, you're going to see accessibility. You're going to see people who wouldn't use cars today, blind people, very, very old people, very, very young people be able to partake in transportation with this new modem. And you'll see it to be more cost effective. For example, I'm a pilot. I'm actually a jet pilot. I have my own jet. And when I fly these days, all I ever do is after I'm a takeoff, I push one button. And then I'm being told by ATC, turn left for 50 degrees, climb up 1,000 feet. And that means I'm going to dial a number into a computer. And that's all I ever do. So the machine basically flies itself by all practical purposes. It can even land itself in an emergency. That's something that I think we're going to see all around. I see everybody now in the future being able to use these technologies to be safer, faster. You can sleep while you're in the car. You don't have to drive it anymore. You can watch a television movie and get transportation safer and cheaper than today.
Back to Paul's comment about the conversation surrounding AI right now. One of the big angles, I suppose, in that conversation is the ethical question. And you bring up the point where the advent of the steam engine or modern agriculture changed society. And certainly if you look through a broad lens, it changed it in an objectively good way. But that transition wasn't always an easy one. And there were inflection points along the way in which the human condition, in some instances, did suffer from this process of modernization. So what lessons can we learn from industrialization, for example, and that process that took several hundred years to apply these new technologies in a way that is more uniformly good for humanity at large?
I think it's a great question, Ryan, that you're asking here. And it's a question we should all be talking about, in part because this revolution is so much faster than the past revolutions we've seen. What used to take 50 years will now take 5 years, to be quite frank. And it's important that no one is left behind. It's important that we as a society use these technologies responsibly for the betterment of everybody, not just a few. It's a very broad dialogue that's underway right now. I don't think technology can be stopped. I think what we can do is really think about what are the implications. Overall, these technologies will produce more wealth, more things, more goods, more abundance. How can we make sure that the abundance that's being produced is fairly distributed among all of us?
In your opinion, who bears responsibility for ensuring that that is the outcome? Is it up to individual agents? Is it up to the corporate world? Or does there need to be some kind of oversight from a government structure, or locally or internationally?
I think it's everybody's responsibility. It's us, the people that are affected, us, the technologists, us, the consumers, us, the voters who vote representatives for us into office. It's us, the office holders that have been elected to do this. And we got to be wicked smart about it. It's really easy to say, let's just outlaw it. That just happened in Italy. Italy said ChatGPT is outlawed. If you go back in history, you find that the Turkish Empire and the Middle East illegalized the printing press. And that didn't turn out well for them because that precluded the dissemination of innovation and new information. So we have to have a broad dialogue, but we should not put our head in the sand and say we don't want it. We should instead say, what's the most productive, best use that is fair to everybody and helps us as a human race to become better?
I want to go back to your work in the arc of your corporate and technology endeavors. You played this critical role in the early advent of the autonomous vehicle and working with the team at Google to get Waymo going. And then you've transitioned into the flying car or the vertical takeoff aircraft space. And I'm just curious, as we think about, and I don't know if you can see behind us, but we've got these 180, 190 mile per hour. And I don't know if you've been tracking the progress, but we now are passing each other at 180 miles an hour on ovals and transitioning to road courses. Kind of, how do you see the challenges of transitioning from the passenger car environment to aircraft that are traveling at higher speeds? What drew you to that? It sounds like you're a pilot, so maybe it's just your own personal passion. But and then what is your thought about how soon are we going to see that technology, in some cases, augment, probably not replace, but certainly augment our focus on ground-based mobility that is still we're so dependent on for, let's say, short or mid-distance trips?
I mean, historically, the ground made sense for transportation because gravity just pulled us all down and it's really hard to stay up in the air. But I'd say for quite a while now, it's been clear that we can get the same efficiency, fuel efficiency, cost efficiency in the air that we can get on the ground. And what do you gain by going to the air? Number one, pretty much all obstacles are gone. Like all the stuff that you avoid on the ground, like trees and houses and curbs and whatever.
Potholes.
They're all gone. Maybe with the exception of a few birds. There's no cats and dogs in the sky. Then you get to go in a much, much bigger volume. So instead of having paved roads, the roads in the sky, they just don't require any pavement. There's no infrastructure necessary except for the place where you take off and land. And with VTOL, vertical takeoff and landing, helicopter-like, you can land and take off pretty much anywhere. If there's no overhead lines, you just go and do this in your front yard, in your driveway. And then once you're in the air, you go on a straight line. You go much faster, much more efficiently. We've shown at Kitty Hawk that the fuel consumption for a one passenger eVTOL vehicle is roughly a third of that of a Tesla electric car per mile. And that even at twice the speed, which probably quadruples the drag of the vehicle. So it's actually more fuel efficient to be in the air than on the ground. So from a safety perspective, from an efficiency perspective, from a cost perspective, from a green perspective, air-based transportation will completely thwart ground transportation going forward.
One of our theses in this is that I agree with everything you just said. The importance of the edge case in air traffic is that much more important because of the velocity in which an accident happens, the way in which an accident happens. Now, I think a lot of that can be managed with things like the carbon fiber monocoques that are in race cars, and we know so much about how to protect the passenger, the critical cargo. But one of the luxuries you have with passenger cars going 20, 30 miles an hour is they can crash and you just sort of put them back together and, hopefully nobody gets hurt in it. So in your mind, how do you test those edge cases? Like, because these are expensive aircraft, and how do you convince yourself and convince the consumer that getting into this type of transportation option is going to keep them safe?
Look, we already have air transportation that's insanely safe today. If you took the accident rates for commercial traffic in the 1980s and applied it to the volumes we see in the skies today, we'd have a major jet crash every 3 to 4 weeks.
Oh, wow.
I can't remember the last commercial crash in the United States of a large aircraft. I know there was one, of course. We had a terrorist attack in 2001.
Sure.
Right. We had
a pilot
shortly thereafter.
Right.
In fact, I'd say roughly half of the large jet crashes today seem to be more of a terrorist nature. There's someone does something very, very stupid intentionally. It's very, very safe. And why is it so safe? It's safe for a number of reasons. One is the FAA has done a really tremendously great job in mandating redundancy and certification and standards that go way beyond automotive standards today. And secondly, the sky is actually very patient. It's very large. It's very hard to run into stuff in the sky. Compare yourself on the ground. You might be on a surface road. You go 65 miles an hour. You have oncoming traffic. And you pass each other with a differential speed of 130 miles an hour, maybe with like 6 to 10 foot clearance. That is scary. You would never do this in the sky. In the sky right now, aircraft have clearances that are hundreds of thousands of feet away. And we can maintain those using computer control very, very, very easily. So in that point, I think the sky will outsave the ground at some point. At some point, you're going to go to a grandchild and say, look, when it be unsafe, take a car. When it be safe, take a plane.
Yeah.
What is the timeline? How soon do you think that this is going to be commonplace versus something that almost sounds like science fiction to those that haven't been following what you've been working on?
Well, there's about, I'd say, these 10 very credible companies right now. Some recently went public through a SPAC, building those vehicles, working with the FAA and EASA in Europe on certification. And I expect that we're going to see the first ones on the market maybe in, let's say, 3 years from now, roughly 2, 3 years, 4 years from now. And those will not be very economical. They'll still be very expensive, hard to make. They'll cost millions of dollars. But a lot of thinking has gone recently into the question, can we make them cheaper? Can we make them as cheap as a car? A car, a low-end car, like your cheapest car you can find is about $5 a pound, okay? Right. A race car is probably $50 a pound, so give or take, depending on where you are in the spectrum. A plane today is $500 a pound. We have to get to the point where these airplanes cost $5 a pound. And what would this mean? It would mean that for $10,000 for the price of a jet ski, you could buy yourself an aircraft that can fly 100 miles and get you wherever you want to go within your city. You
talked earlier about how motorsports has produced innovation for the auto industry. Certainly your experience with the DARPA Grand Challenge is that competition breeds innovation. That's certainly a big part of the mantra for the Indy Autonomous Challenge too. Is there some similar type of competition that you could envision for autonomy in the air, like you're talking about, that can drive this forward?
I mean, the obvious one that comes to mind is the Red Bull races, which are like Daredevil races.
Yeah.
And they're kind of interesting because they really challenge technology and pilots alike. Obviously, doing an air-based race has this additional feeling. If you make a really grave mistake, you might actually go up in flames. Even more so than you'd be in a ground race like the Indy 500. And those tend to push safety. They tend to help us understand in extreme situations what are the right technologies and rules of the road to help us keep safe. Will I want to build a air race like the Red Bull race? Probably only without people inside. I wouldn't want to put my children into a vehicle like this and feel good about it. But in due time, I'm pretty sure that we can build safe systems that will give every single person a chance to fly from A to B.
Another passion that you've had is education with Udacity and in your efforts to attract just more people and make it easier for them to engage, particularly in science and technology and engineering. Obviously, one of the focuses of Indy Autonomous Challenge, and we've been speaking with some of the students that are involved in the challenge, is motivating young people and motivating students to drop everything and focus on these technical challenges in a way that they kind of get the bug, and they now want to do this for the rest of their career, and they can see the value in what they're doing in a way that maybe you can't get in a lab environment or just watching a professor online. Did you see that in DARPA with not only yourself, but the other? I mean, you were part of a whole team of students that you were leading and competitors, and how important are these kinds of hands-on real world experiences with the technology that you can see progressing versus having to trust that the lab work you're doing and the research you're doing will contribute to something in the future?
I recommend every student in the world just go do it. It's so much fun. There's something very concrete you want to accomplish. Don't let the wise old people tell you it can't be done. They're wrong. Everything can be done if you just put your brains behind it. And to me, as a researcher, as a longtime Stanford professor, the source of all the theories that we came up with on the academic side were always grounded in experiments just like these, where we went and built something in the physical world and really tried it out and learned from how to build it better, how to make it stronger, what technology worked better, and so on. So highly recommended. It's something where if you get engulfed, you should find yourself not sleeping. You should find yourself every waking moment thinking about it, including weekends. I know it's not very social for most people, but it's been a ton of fun. And if you finally build something that drives itself at 150 miles an hour, you can look at it and say, I made that.
We did get the question from students when we told them that we had this garage space at Monza. They wanted to know what the hours are. And of course, they always want very early hours to very late hours. But we had to make it very clear they could not sleep in the garage. They had to leave for at least 2 or 3 hours. But I think maybe
I'm
some of
pretty
them,
sure they're going to sleep in the garage.
Yeah, I think some
you.
of them are sleeping in their cars just outside the park, and then they come back in the morning.
I remember the very first robot competition. I had a small robot, an office robot, and it was standing in front of me and had worked like 3 days without sleeping. And it was starting the competition, running around, and I looked up, it was gone. And it entirely disappeared. It had like evaporated. And I was completely confused. And then my teammates told me, Sebastian, you just took a nap on your keyboard. We won the competition and you just woke up.
Power nap, right?
I must have been like 20 at the time.
I'm super interested, actually, if we go back to those early days, because in my research, your interest in robotics, in automation, this goes back a long way. If I'm not mistaken, back in the late 90s, you were working on a completely automated tour guide, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right?
Right. Now you're dating me. That's kind of embarrassing. I want to be careful here. Yes, 90s, those existed.
Yes.
People were alive back then, myself included.
Well, me too.
My research went from indoor to outdoors. In the early years, I built a lot of robots that would be inside buildings. One of the early highlights was a robot we brought to the Smithsonian Museum,
right.
One of the museums in Washington, D.C., where we had a tour guide operational as a robot that would greet kids and people and say, hey, can I give you a tour? And it became a spectacle. It really became an event in Washington, D.C. to see a robotic tour guide. I still remember at some point in the evening, in these museums, the tour guides are human docents, and they're typically retired people who do this as a hobby. They don't take any pay. And one of the ladies walked up to the robot and was really angry and said, look, you're not going to replace me. And no one else saw it, but I saw it like through the blink of my eye that she was having this conversation with this robot. And the robot was like sitting in the corner doing nothing, just looked like a guilty feeling robot. And there was a moment when I realized, my God, we're actually doing something that could change people's lives.
If you had Chat GPT at the time, you could have embedded it in the robot and it would have been...
oh my God, yes.
It would have gotten rid of all the jobs really quickly.
Have you seen people's reactions to robotics change in the last 3 decades or so? Or is that same visceral reaction, you can't replace me, does that still kind of ring true? Is that almost universal?
I think most of us are still waiting for the robot revolution to unfold. We've seen it now in AI. In robotics, obviously, there's an amazing work that people don't normally see naturally, which is in factories, conveyor belts, and packaging, and palleting, and welding, and stuff like that. Automotive, that stuff is well established. But in home robotics, we're still waiting, except for me for the Roomba vacuum cleaner. We're still waiting for this robot that can just clean our kitchen at night, and that's around the corner. There's now startup companies that are seriously building affordable, safe, and reliable machines that can clean up our house. And when that happens, it'd be interesting to see how people react. I think by and large, it'd be a good thing because it helps us keeping our environments clean, gives us more time back, and it does the work we don't want to do ourselves. That's going to happen next, let's say, 10 years or so.
Your love affair with robotics, has it been driven by the use cases and the application of robotics to a particular challenge, and then you apply your understanding and your fascination with robotics, versus just the robot itself and trying to perfect the hardware and the software?
Yeah, so I always loved the idea of understanding human intelligence. And I always felt from my earliest days on as an undergrad, robots are the perfect way to study intelligence because they are embedded. They have ability to manipulate the world, to perceive the physical world. And they're the closest thing we can build to ourselves, short of like, I don't know, having kids or something, but we can really understand every little bit of information that's flowing through the robot's brains. From that, I've always been asking myself, like, what's the right way to build these robots to make the world a better place for everybody? How can I build a robot that will impress my grandmother who doesn't understand technology and still has human needs like normal human beings? And self-driving cars emerged quickly as the winning answer because cars is something we all use every day. In this world, we lose over 1 million people a year in traffic accidents. It's a massive number. We often don't even pay attention to that. There's like a million plus funerals, million plus lives lost. It's like a big city wiped out every year. So for me, that was kind of the opportunity to say this is something that we can do, bring together this genuine curiosity on AI into something that's practical and good for people.
Last thing for me, we seem to be on the precipice of a new age of AI, of robotics, of automation, and so many avenues appear to be open for exploration. Are there any, though, that you have some reticence about exploring, or is it open season?
I think given the recent advances in AI, I'm very excited to ask the question, how can we leverage AI to make people more effective and people more efficient and give people more capabilities? In doing so, there are potential abuses, the biggest being, of course, cyber kind of threats to good people against good people from bad actors, bad countries like North Korea. That's something, or Russia, that I worry about. And that's something we should all worry about. And then what we talked about earlier, how can we make sure when this technology is being used that everybody can benefit, not just a small number of individuals. But pending all this, I think if you look at humanity is 300,000 years old, right? We are 300,000 years old. This is a long time. And almost everything that has advanced us, the things we're proud of, from like a cell phone to your car, to your airplane, to what have you, has been invented in the last 150 years. Even like electricity as a phenomenon, your light switch, like very mundane things, your water toilet are not older than 200, 300 years. So that's something I think that's been an inflection point for humanity to see this technology advance us so rapidly. And I would say we are all better off as a result. We're all better off with a microwave at home and a roof over top and heat and all these wonderful things that we all enjoy compared to where we were like 300, 400, 500 years ago. So for me, AI is just another step, another progression in that will just give us the ability to be more creative, more engaged, build more things, try more things, and advance society even further. So me, it's a very, very positive development.
Fascinating conversation. So much more I'm sure we could go into, but we have to be conscious of your time. Sebastian, thank you so much for joining us and sharing so many of your thoughts. Thanks for joining us this week on The Inside Track. That was Sebastian Thrun sharing his insight into the future of AI and the new roads we're likely to see in the future. Next week, we'll be sitting down with David Watkins, Senior Vice President of the Indiana Economic Development Corporation, to discuss how state-funded races can truly put Indiana on the technological map. And thanks to the Indiana Economic Development Corporation for sponsoring this show.